How's it going, everyone? This is Jake with Studio 346. No Mark this month. We are giving him some much-needed time off. That said, I am joined by a few of my fellow developers. I've got Eric with me, I've got Daniel, I've got Theo, I've got Nate, Tom, and we have a special guest who we're going to introduce at the end of the video. So do y'all just want to say hi real quick?
Hello.
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 Howdy.
Dan, you were so aggressive with your hello. So, we've got a couple happy Shays here in Ponderosa.
Yeah.
That I think you were wanting to tell us something, a little something about.
Yeah, so this sort of devlog between bigger, newer features, we're going to go through a little bit of what makes Shays unique and how we try to grasp that feel. So right now we have, what you'd recognize the most out of all the 60-ton narrow gauge Shays, which is the west side ones. These are how they appeared roughly at end of life. One thing I found very quickly is that these things never stopped changing. So what I mean by end of service life is sort of early 1960s for the most part, when they were put into towns before they were reactivated for tourist service. So we've got number 7 on the left, which is the oldest of the three. It's got a stock steel cab. You'll notice there's no original bunker. It only has the oil tank. It's great. And a number of other variations on it. The major distinction you'll notice, no builder's plate. These occupy just about the space where I modeled every single builder's plate, but during rebuilds, a lot of engines lost their plates, so this version doesn't have one. It's also got, if you want to go to the other side, Jake, it's got the air compressor right in the middle of the boiler. That's where Lima liked to put it. It's also got the generator up on the boiler in a very typical position. We'll get into why that has multiple options with the other engines. But it's a very distinctive thing. And you've got a few other options scattered around the engine. Toolbox options. This particular engine, I'm showing it with no reverse headlight. By the end of life, I think it had one. But call it an interpretive choice, or call it me reading photos wrong. Either way, that is number 7. So then we'll go over to number 14, which, despite the numbering configuration, this is the newest one. You can see it's also got a steel cab, but it's a very different design.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, number 14, or number 10, as it was at the time, was in a fire in 1928 at the Hobart Estate, and it lost its original steel cab. So this new one was built by the Sierra Nevada Wood and Lumber Company, or the Hobart Estate. It was built following the sight lines of the wood cab. So it's kind of an interesting design, but very chunky, big old windows, kind of a nice look.
Yeah, it's a nice look, and I feel like it would be very nice to operate from.
Oh yeah. Otherwise, it's got a lot of similar stuff. You'll notice the dynamo is not in front of that center window. It's on the side of the smoke box. And
Under the builder's
air
plate.
Yeah, the air compressor is also on the side of the smoke box, and both 14 and 15 retain their builder's plates. It's also got a different headlight. I am still in communication about what exact headlights these all got. We're probably going to wind up with remodeled headlights at some point. More on that later. But those sort of cosmetic changes that alter the silhouette of the engine were really important to me. So whether or not it has the bunker, different headlights, different toolboxes, I really wanted to get those because those will make it feel like a different locomotive. Mm-hmm. There aren't that many mechanical changes on these Shays currently. There might be a big one. eventually. And then the last one we have is 15. And 15 is the middle child, so to speak. It's the earlier of the two Sierra Nevada Wood and Lumber Company Shays. Very, very similar, but it's got the longer headlight, of course. It's the only one that retained a wood cab. This wood cab was also built by Sierra Nevada Wood and Lumber, but it's the best reference I had to an original Lima cab, and it kind of matches the Lima cab from what I could tell. So it's got the 3 front windows, got nice big side windows, everything like that. The reason that cab was rebuilt is because 9 fell off a trestle on the Sierra Nevada Wood and Lumber. And so if you look, you'll find a photo where it just does not have a cab.
We'll insert that in the video.
Yeah,
because
it's a good one. But you've got the very distinctive sort of 2 panels on the other side, everything like that. Water pump. All the West Side engines wind up with a water pump. That's to fill up the tank. What's fascinating to me is they just go into the injector line, as one does. So multi-use lines there. But otherwise, that's your nice modern Shay.
Oh wow, yeah, no, I just saw it. Yeah, literally.
Goes
water
straight
pump,
on in there.
Injector line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So where would this water pump be taking water from?
You can see there's an open valve above the running board on the right. So the left side of the pump there is the steam side, right side is the water side. And then it is taking in from that top valve that just goes out to the open, off to your right there.
Hook a hose up to that?
Yeah, you'd hook a hose up to it. And then it is taking water in from that hose that you hook up and putting it into the cistern. So you've got a steam valve that can refuel the engine if you aren't at a water tank.
And that's why every Shay's boiler is ruined. And that's all I have to say for the episode. Hello.
Okay, so we've got 3 more Shays you were wanting to show us. And
yeah,
I also turned up my graphics settings because I realized I had them down way lower than they needed to be last time. Oops.
These are the same 3 engines. You'll notice that one of them even carries the same number. Barely. I modeled each of these to photos. I was talking with the others about how, something could just be a misinterpretation of a photo. I only wanted to model stuff if I knew what it looked like, and sometimes the challenge was getting an early photo. So this shot of number 7, you'll see it's still number 7 here. It's not Butte and Plumas 4, which is what it was delivered as. I could not find a photo prior to about 1920. So this thing is on West Side Lumber Company. It's been on West Side Lumber Company for about 2 years at this point. And so it's got a lot of the trademark West Side features, the yellow text, the red ends, as far as I could tell. It's a black and white photo, but they did look substantially lighter than the rest of the locomotive. It's also got a very substantial trademark of West Side Lumber Company, which is completely mismatching text. Go figure. But all in all, a pretty neat looking engine. Got electric lights by this point. It's the only one in this lineup of 3 engines that does. Otherwise, it's fairly unchanged. Although the lights themselves are different than end of life. Couldn't tell you why. Then we've got 9. Still with its oil lighting, with the compressor up on the smoke box. And no water pump yet. Right? But let's go back to the sunny side and take a look how it compares. So The only good shot of 9 I had was end of its time on Hobart Estate, 1930s. So it's pretty worn out here, but it's still largely unchanged. Much like the other railroads that were owned by the same people, like the V&T and the Lake Tahoe Railway, not a ton changes on the Sierra Nevada Wood and Lumber Company engines over the course of their lives. So it's still got the same lighting system, still got the hooter whistle, still got a wooden cab, everything like that. Actually, let's go in the cab, Jake. Yeah, so take a look at that bright red gauge lamp.
Yeah.
And you might zoom in on that. So this is a pretty standard thing, which is a gauge lamp that instead of having a full hood, just has the glass painted except for the front. You can see that on today on engines like Rio Grande number 168 and things like that. Actually, talking of 168, since this is not a Baldwin, I had to rely pretty heavily on the on catalog headlight arrangements and on the modern day work of the W.T. Kirkman Company. Fans of W.T. Kirkman will recognize that gauge lamp because it was the most standard one I could find. The boiler lamp is a star number 83 with a Porter chimney. Because logging. The water gauge lamp is a reproduction that did not have an original builder attached to it, but it's made by W.T. Kirkman. So that is a replica of a lamp that's in their collection. Otherwise, all the oil burning equipment is still here. These engines were delivered burning oil. All the brake equipment is still here, everything like that. So now we can move on and look at number 10. Number 10 is sort of late 1910s condition. It's right after it's got its new cab. So it's still got the oil lighting, everything like that, but it's got the new cab. It's got some parts swapped off of number 7, which was, as far as I know, just trashed by the fire. Otherwise, its details are largely the same as number 9. These were twin engines. In some ways, they still very much are. The big change from Westside is it still has its bunker wraparound that it came with, even though that isn't really doing anything much here.
And
no toolbox.
This bit?
Yeah, you'll recall on the west side that was just gone.
Yeah, I remember the other one. It just had a naked tank. Yeah.
We won't see it much, but you can put text on that, and it will remap directly onto the bunker if you don't have a tank.
Oh, neat.
Or opposite way around. It'll remap directly onto the tank if you don't have a bunker. And the handrails attach directly to the tank if you don't have a bunker.
Okay.
All right. With that, let's load up the next route, and we'll look at some actually different engines that aren't these 3 again.
All right.
All right. Now we're talking. Got some big stacks here. We've got some wood burners here. This is Madera Sugar Pine Company number 5. It's one of 2 60-tonners they had. The other one's a lot more modern. So we can represent number 5 accurately here. This is late teens, as far as I can tell, in terms of its livery and everything like that. It's got the dual headlights. Actually, a very funny thing worth noting is that the Madera Sugar Pine would eventually build a box around the rear headlight to protect it from wood, in case the wood fell over when it was stacked on the rear tank. Because otherwise, it's just right, it's right in clobberin range, as shown there. I couldn't see any lettering on the tender. That's how a lot of these early engines were delivered. But you've got, nice high hungry boards, the standard steel cab, everything like that. No wood loads yet. We're not going to duplicate that work until we have wood firing finalized. Steel cab, that giant Radley and Hunter that is so distinctive on the Madeira Sugar Pine engines, that's actually Lima standard. These are late enough that a lot of the West Coast roads that ordered 60-ton locomotives were getting oil burners. So anywhere you could see that as long as you're wood fired. Compressors in the standard location, oil lights, all that good stuff. No toolboxes or anything here. That space is all reserved for firewood. And speaking of firewood, let's go on to the other wood burner, which is Diamond and Caldor number 6. And here we're seeing our first actual meaningfully Lima catalog paint scheme. We'll see some more of these later. By around 1913, Lima was using just a very simple white striping. Their default, unless you ask for something else, was white paint, which was pretty rare in the 1910s. Aluminum was much more common. So you've got white stripes on the bunkers. You've got the road name picked out on the tender. Numbers in the same size on the dome and the cab. All that good stuff. Oil lighting. One fun thing that I kind of had to draw the line on is actually that the Diamond and Caldor was not known for doing anything they didn't strictly have to. You'll notice all of these engines have Lincoln pin couplers. And, you know, this engine that's ordered in the middle of the 1910s still has acetylene lights, or oil lights. A lot of these engines do. When Diamond and Caldor converted these engines to oil firing for the first time, they didn't even remove the boards for the firewood. They just left them up there. It's an interesting way that you can see the history of these engines in historic photos. And speaking of historic photos, we'll go over to 7, which isn't looking too hot right now.
No, it looks like it's been buddy-buddy with the Titanic down on the bottom of the ocean floor. Excuse me, sir, you dropped your hat, maybe?
Don't worry about it, it's fine.
Oh, I would have laughed if it had a tender light but not a headlight.
Nope. If you look at late photographs of these engines, you will see that the steam delivery pipe for the cylinders is routed from the smoke box, whereas right here it's routed from the domes. Lima delivered everything more or less directly from the dome is because that keeps the delivery pipe nice and short. Now, when I saw the delivery pipe coming from the smoke box on the Diamond and Caldor engines, I kind of put my head in my hands, because what that implies to me is they may have been superheated. More research pending on that before we get that as a variation, but that would be an interesting variation to get.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. Like, if it's coming from the smoke box, like, the only reason you would do that is that you have superheater headers coming out in the smoke box.
Yeah, exactly. And some of these engines were rebuilt with superheat. I just don't have concrete confirmation that the DNC engines were, and I'm waiting on that before I go ahead and build it, because I don't want to give the coders a headache if it isn't deserved.
The thought of the Diamond and Caldor having anything superheated is just terrifying.
Well, the Diamond and Caldor was actually, for all of the weirdness they have, they were kind of an innovator. So the very next engine, they had a third locomotive, the number 8, that was delivered with the newer running board arrangement and everything like that. They got number 8, and a few months later, they sent Lima a letter with an attached blueprint for a drivetrain bracket. And they said, you can use these blueprints for free, provided you never deliver us anything with the old drivetrain bracket ever again. The machinists of the Diamond and Caldor were apparently pretty competent. Just nobody else was.
Isn't the Diamond and Caldor the railroad that used second-hand bridges?
Yeah. Are y'all ready for colors? Now we're getting into engines that are not strictly prototype models of 60-ton narrow-gauge Shays. As you might tell from the fire engine red on our right here.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to tell the story of the Pickering Lumber Company to a degree. Pickering was just over on the other side of the mountain from the West Side Lumber Company. They had both standard gauge and narrow gauge, right? So, West Side number 10, that's now running at the Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine, is the last narrow gauge Shay built, and it is originally a Pickering engine. But the other well-known Pickering Shay is Pickering 12, which is well known for being bright, bright red. I'm paraphrasing the history here, but essentially what happens is Pickering interchanged with the Sierra Railway, and there was one point where sparks from a locomotive caused a fire, and the damaged party could not figure out who to sue because they did not know whether it was a Pickering or Sierra locomotive. So to avoid liability, because they were very sure they had not been the ones to do it, Pickering decided to choose a colorful livery that would distinguish their locomotives. This was around 1925, and the first livery that was trialed was that one on the right there. It's certainly a striking livery.
Yep.
But it's not what you might describe as subtle or tasteful.
I feel like that was entirely the point, though. They colored it like a fire engine so that you would know it's not the fire engine.
Fair idea. The trouble was that the crews weren't particularly fond of it. The shop guys weren't particularly fond of it. So we'll go through it a little bit, but that engine's got bright red top, black underneath. It actually is kind of a sharp scheme. I had to make some custom headlight materials to allow the user to properly match this scheme. You'll notice it's also got the Sierra Nevada Wood and Lumber Company cab, which is the closest prototype model I had to what Pickering 12 actually has. Pickering 12, of course, still survives today. It's at the Niles Canyon Railway. And it is, as far as I know, the oldest 3-truck Shay in existence. Its serial number is 589, I think. But it's quite an old locomotive. You see that circular builder's plate on full display here. It's great.
Yep.
But as I said, the crews didn't like that scheme terribly much. So in the center, we've got the same exact locomotive, give or take, but it's in a much toned down red. And it's got the logo on the bunker. This is the first time we've seen something with a logo on the bunker. This is what Pickering wound up going with. And they didn't keep it all that long in the grand scheme of things, but long enough for it to become well known among rail fans. They settled on a much darker red that still is a pronounced difference, but it looks a lot more tasteful. And this is much more in tune with other reds that other logging locomotives used. I am not confirming nor denying a Mauer red option here, but I have had requests for it.
I mean, I personally would have gone with a sick Lambo blue, but that's just me.
I mean, that would be dope, but it sounds a bit high maintenance for a logging road. Anyway. Yeah, so we've got that nice one, and then we've got what personally is my favorite, which is a polished steel boiler jacket. I love this scheme.
Very smart.
Yeah. So this is the final scheme you see on Pickering Lumber stuff, and it is the paint scheme you see, and we'll attach a photo here, of Pickering Lumber number 10 when it was new. What's now Westside Lumber number 10. Westside 10 is a 70-ton locomotive, so I can't replicate 10 exactly, but we wanted to present that history. So it's got the iconic diamond Lima builder's plate. It's got what amounts to factory Lima striping. Pickering generally used the same Lima striping. Ivory used the same pattern. One thing we might see is a lot of railroads use the same pattern, but some continued the stripe onto the cab. We don't have any of that to show yet, but we might when the game ships. It's kind of up in the air. Logging schemes are much, much more into the aftermarket varieties. Lima only had a couple of patterns at any given time. So this is much more a game of what is worth it to us to represent here. And we really wanted to get a polished steel jacket. That's just cool. Otherwise, it's a lot more modern. You see the newer type of smoke box door. You see a headlight mounted on the cab, and a nice little spark arrestor as well. All in all, very different silhouette. I really like this combination of details. This is probably my choice if I was doing a pure logging road.
Yeah, but I gotta say this is about what I'd pick too. This is very, very smart looking. I like it.
Yeah. All right, let's go to our next and last batch of options. All right, more big stacks.
Yeah.
So
big stacks.
Yeah. These are the most freelance of the designs we've shown, but we wanted to highlight specific features that were offered as Lima standards. So they're arrayed from oldest to newest, so let's go over to the left, Jake. And we'll see this kind of smart but a little bit goofy livery. This is the earlier Lima standard paint scheme. Black with gold lining and lettering. We offer also offer it in yellow color and in aluminum, etc. But Lima, by default, you would have gotten black with gold. To my knowledge, that's just what you would get. A lot of engines early on have just the names. So we've got the name. I took the liberty of putting the road initials on the bunker. And we've got box headlights. I don't know that we've shown these off before. These are the star number 11 headlight. Notably, they are the Pennsylvania Railroad standard. You've got the wood cab. The wood cab is actually the only one that has striping because this style disappeared before the steel cab was standard. So there's no reference for what steel cab would have. Nice square panels and then weird rounded panels above and below the cab panel. I'm not a huge fan of that. To me, that's the thing that works the least on this whole scheme. But it's what they did, so it's what we present to you. Otherwise, nice diamond stack. This is the one coal burner we're showing on the lineup. All that good stuff. This is the most Eastern you'll see us get in this devlog. Sorry. But at least you get something. I should mention that diamond stack can come with or without the top spark arrestor. Lima standard was with it, so I showed it with it. Then in the middle, we've got another much more modern engine. This one has a later type of Radley and Hunter smokestack. It's much more squat and much more evenly proportioned than the earlier ones we saw in the Madera Sugar Pine engines and things like that. This is directly based on what was delivered on Oregon, or it was New Mexico Lumber Company number 7, which is the last 60-ton Shay built for narrow gauge. We don't have enough details to accurately represent number 7. It famously, since it's so late, has superheating and a cast frame, all that good stuff.
Cast frame on a narrow gauge Shay?
Yeah. Everything built after Diamond and Caldor number 8 has a cast frame. Which is very, very cool, but unfortunately, that's why we can't represent the rest of the 60-tonners. So, otherwise, it's all that good factory paint, steel cab. You've seen almost all of these options by this point. The other thing is the headlight. I was talking about we might see a redux.
It's got a cute little star on it. I just noticed that.
That's been in the game since very early on, but I want to do Tom the honors and show off their nice decorative objects here where I can. The prototype options didn't seem to have any. But anyway, as I keep modeling new stuff and as the team keeps modeling new stuff. We kind of keep pushing the detail level for appliances up. And that's part of being in pre-alpha. But when I was having to build all of these new headlights to change the silhouettes of locomotives, I wanted to get a really good base going. So this is the first of a new generation. You'll see if you look closely, it's got a bulb with a filament inside. It's a very high detail headlight, nice smooth geometry, all that good stuff. This is the detail level I want to strive for on later headlights, maybe with a slight improvement on the mapping around the reflector, but otherwise I was very happy with how that came out. And then our last engine with the plow. So that plow is also a Lima standard part. I don't know of any narrow gauge engines that had it, but I couldn't not model it. I mean, look at it. It's very funny. So we have engines with a plow. We have engines with a white smokebox front. We've seen stuff like that before. And of course, we've got the most iconic late era logging stack, which is the Rushton stack. Y'all might also know it as the cabbage stack or things like that. The Rushton is basically just an update of the Radley and Hunter design, but it uses a cast center to try to extend the lifespan of the stack. The idea of both the Radley and Hunter and the Rushton is to cause a cyclone in there that will kind of bash any sparks into submission. The trade-off is that with the Radley and Hunter that was made from sheet metal, you had these hard angles at the edges of the cyclone, and those would wear away. And the mesh in the middle of it would wear away. And so you'll see on some railroads, like the Sierra Nevada Wood and Lumber Company, wood-burning locomotives had Rushton stacks during fire season, and other types of smokestacks during not fire season. Because Rushtons were so relatively expensive that you really wanted them when you had them. But if you didn't absolutely need them, you wanted to save them so you wouldn't have to rebuild them. The Rushton was an attempt to remedy that. This Rushton is based on Baldwin standard practice. Rushton was a designer for Baldwin, so that is the authoritative Rushton smokestack. And their instructions actually, when Rushton came up with this stack, were if a road orders a Radley and Hunter, give them a Rushton. So any newer engines would have this type by and large, right? New Mexico Lumber is kind of an exception, and they did give number 7 a Rushton stack later in life. So that kind of covers the whole gamut of what we expect most Shays to look like. There are a couple options that may get added later, but this gets a full look at what we sort of expect. And you'll see the scope is a lot less, right? Lima was a very simple builder compared to Baldwin, and there are a lot fewer options. The other thing is just that we're representing a lot fewer locomotives.
All right, well, with that, I think we are going to get moved on to some fun Q&A things. So we'll be back with you in a second.
All right, so now we're going to move on to the next section, which is our Q&A. We got over 160 responses when we put out a call for questions.
Yeah, it's a lot of questions.
Without further ado, I see you're the first one up, Jake.
Yep. William Grantham asks, will there be any way to use hand signals? And if so, will there be different systems of hand signals that you can use? So we have some super, super cool and really fun ideas for this. We're going to be able to show them off more when multiplayer comes around, but I am super, super excited for this. I think Tom and I basically came up with like the same idea at almost the same time. And yeah, it's going to be really fun. All right, and then we got a ton of people, quite understandably, asking about track laying. Track laying is still going to be quite a ways out. All of the track we have now It is like procedural. It's not like, they're like set like curved pieces or straight pieces. It's all procedural. It's all spline based. We do have like some set switches that we use. The thing is, right now the system that the player uses for actually laying track at runtime just doesn't exist. We have some really specific ideas for how we want that to go. It's such a key part of the game. And it's also like what I was originally brought onto the game to do like 2 years ago. Wound up doing a whole bunch of stuff between now and then. If you've ever seen the Malcolm in the Middle scene where, the wife asks Hal to change a light bulb and she comes back and he's under the car. He's like, what does it look like I'm doing? That has been my existence for the past 2 years. But we have some really specific ideas for how we want that to work. And it's a hugely complex system. It's probably going to be one of the last things to go into the game. Probably going to be one of the last things to show off. But it's something that's really going to get a lot of care and a lot of thought and make sure it works just super well. Because I've been in games where laying track was not the greatest, and it was like the number one, like, made me not want to spend time in that game thing. So that is something I'm hugely passionate about getting right. I think all of us are.
And conversely, when you have a really good building system, it's incredibly satisfying.
Yeah, we very much are hyper aware of how finicky and frustrating track laying in video games can be. And so we are, even though we're not showing stuff yet for it, we are putting in the groundwork of making sure that the stuff that is there physically is being made with consideration of the system in the front end of a user experience that we want to present the player. So like that work is happening, but it will be a while before we can wrap the bow on it and have something that is going to be really satisfying as a presentation style.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Quinn Sparks asked, absolutely amazing work you guys have done so far. I do have one question, though. You mentioned in the July devlog that the Shay was leased. Will leasing equipment be a feature in-game? So the bit about leasing the Shay was actually just Mark having a little bit of fun and role-playing, since the locomotive was lettered for the West Side Lumber Company and everything else on the map was Ponderosa Lumber Company. It's a neat idea. I don't know if it's something we'll actually do, but it certainly would be really fun.
Yeah. We've discussed thoughts about how we might do it. We don't have anything concrete to confirm or deny yet. All right. Eric has our next question.
All right. Hello. So our next question comes from Galaxy Express 5550.
Great name.
Indeed. First off, just wanted to say I love the Shay and happy 1-year anniversary to you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Second, will you be able to do repair work on your locomotives over time? Like, can they break down and such? And so to answer your question, yes. Maintenance and breakdowns will be part of the game. For example, the steam leaks, the very out-of-time valve gear, and other effects on the very tired 440 that was in the last video are examples of how this system will come to affect the operating experience. So, yeah.
Yeah, internally we've got most of the handles we need for locomotive wear yet. We're just not to the point where we're making extended enough runs to show off it happening in real time. All right. And Jake has our next question again.
So Simon Leach asked, this may have been answered already, but what will mod support look like? Will there be the ability to mod in maps or rolling stock? Will there be a Steam Workshop page? I'm sure people from around the world would love to see local rolling stock or places that look like their backyard. So this is something we personally would love to see. I personally would love to see it. But the fact of the matter is, Unreal Engine is actually not great at offering native mod support. It can be done, it's just not the most straightforward thing. And as much as I would personally love to see it, I'm simply not in a place where I can guarantee, or we can guarantee, that it's going to be a thing. It's not something that we are like philosophically opposed to.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it is not like at the top of our priority list to make sure it gets done. So we'll see how that turns out.
I know Andrew, Drew, Tom, myself, we all had our starts in modding other games. There is no one more than a 3D modeler who really wants good mod support, because it means that people aren't asking only me for additional content. But yeah, it's not something we can guarantee until it comes around. So watch this space, I guess. All right, Nate, for our next question.
WGO1 asks, will we have some form of in-depth tutorials, either in-game or externally, so we can learn to run these beasts as realistically as possible? Since this seems to be the first study-level Steam sim, I'm excited to put my skills to test, but also worried about all the bad habits I've likely picked up from other train sims out there, but don't want to be forced to play casually, if that makes sense. This is something we're actually quite proud of here. We absolutely plan to have tutorials. It wouldn't be the greatest choice for any of us in our gameplay experience to not educate the player on how to operate the locomotives that we provide for you. But even more than that is a huge part of what we want for Century of Steam is to help people learn about steam locomotives and their operation and all the nuances that go with it. Just like in the previous couple questions about, maintenance and breakdowns and stuff, it all comes together in the experience we want for our players.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, our job is to educate, and that means we're not going to leave you, out to dry when it comes to how to run this stuff.
All right. 6Lefty6 asks, will there be 40 locomotives, and will this game be available on console? So we are keeping the list of planned locomotives very, very tight to our chest. The thing with the list of locomotives is, every time we say, yes, it's done, this is the list, guess what happens 5 minutes later?
I go off and model a different engine.
Yep. So, you will have...
Yeah, it's not quite that chaotic. That's a bit of aggrandizing.
It's a bit of hyperbole in the name of fun,
yeah.
but it does it does change more often than we expect.
Yeah,
over the time that we have made this game, we have an active research team, and we uncover things we previously thought we couldn't do. So we might write off an engine and then realize it's possible. Conversely, we might get an engine started, realize that the sources we have are contradictory or otherwise unreliable, and realize that it's not our best use of time. So we want to only promise stuff once it is at least provisionally in the game.
Right. It's the sort of thing where we understand and want to temper people's expectations for stuff. We have a very good idea of the general star players of what is broad strokes, the most important stuff that is representative of a lot of narrow gauge 3-foot history and regional representation and builder representation. And we want to do those to the best ability that we can, but we always want to ensure that we have a backup plan or a substitute if the research or documentation for something doesn't pan out. Because while it would be nice to promise a bunch of things that we think we can do, if we end up realizing, oh, we have better documentation for this, or hey, we just found new documentation for something from a unique builder that fills the role of, say, something that was Baldwin, then we want to be able to adjust our curated list with the most up-to-date info we have.
Yeah, well said. And Tom, I think you actually have the next question.
Yep. So Veronica E asks, as engineers and firemen, why do we have to be unloading and loading the cars? Can't that be done automatically so we can focus on other things like just running trains? So as a preface to this, we absolutely understand that loading and unloading is another pain point in sort of these first-person style train games. We don't want it to be something where loading and unloading is a hassle or a pain or a time sink. We want to keep it as a good balance between ease of use and the amount of control that players have when they interact with industries. That's why we're doing a quick, minimum input menu system rather than trying to interact with things in the world. And people ask us about loading times often of, are we going to do quick loading or stuff like where you have to set it out for several hours or a couple of days. And we want to go with faster loading times mainly for the sake of pacing. It's really easy to have cars that you set out and leave there if you have a bunch of industries connected. But if you're just starting out with a fledgling company that only has maybe a couple places hooked up in a single engine, once you've done your setouts, having to wait for those to unload and having nothing to do is a real killer to the pacing starting out. So we want to keep it snappy. We want to keep it dense, active gameplay that you're always having something that you can do regardless of what stage of the gameplay you're in. And also, there are gameplay reasons to want to have control over the loading, whether you're dealing with less than carload freight or you're dealing with loading specific amounts. That way you can make a hill. Or for consist makeups and setouts, you might want to put certain loads ahead or behind of others because you know the switching order you're going to have. Or you might want to put certain cars at the end of the train or in idler cars because, as one of the previous devlogs showed, trains can explode if they have spicy cargo.
Yeah. The other thing that I'll point out is that you are not just engineers and firemen. You are also conductors, you're brakemen, you're dispatchers. And if you're running a small railroad that was only run by one or two people, to look at a real life example like the Dayton Sutro in Carson Valley, if you only have a couple of people on the crew, you are the ones unloading. You might get off at a turntable and get out of the engine and push it yourself. We have AI to assist in certain roles to enable a single person experience to flow a little more smoothly. But the reality is, the smaller your crew is, you're mimicking a smaller real life crew. And so you're going to do some of those jobs because ultimately it would be somebody in your crew who did it. We'll talk a little bit on this same topic, tossing back to Jake.
Yeah, Tom actually covered a bunch of this in their previous answer. But Fabian Sawilla, I hope I said that correctly, asks, will there be an option to change the speed for loading and unloading cars from instantly, like in the last devlog, to slowly over time, more like in Railroader? The current loading and unloading system does take a little bit of time to load or unload cars, but as Tom said in the last answer, the accelerated pace is a concession that we made, basically in order to respect the player's time. Like, I'm very, very busy. I work a full-time job. I don't have a whole lot of time to, actually game in my personal time. And the one thing that, makes me angrier than anything else is a game that doesn't respect the small amount of time I have to spend with it. And that really is a philosophy that we want to follow. We want to respect the player's time. If they only have an hour to spend with our game, we want that to be a really enjoyable, really productive hour for them. And if that hour has to be spent milling around waiting for cargo to unload, that sucks. The way the system works now, it doesn't preclude any players from role-playing those longer load-unload times. If you want to say it's going to take 4 hours to unload this string of boxes, sure, you are welcome to drop those boxes off, leave them there for 4 hours while you say, the train crew has to go do something else. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. We just don't feel like it's our place to enforce that kind of time limit. Really just would not work
There's
out,
pacing issues,
Yeah, and
exactly.
That's realistic too, because the reason why you would leave a car for a long period of time is because you're going to go do other railroad jobs and let the industry crew unload the car. If you're in a hurry and you need that car, you'll unload it yourself.
Mm-hmm. And for what it's worth, there's also still gameplay and strategy reasons why you would want to set cars out and then only pick them up maybe on the return trip. Like, say, if you are doing setouts, while climbing a hill, or if you know a hill is going to be coming up, if you know you're not going to load the boxcar on the way back, you could just leave it at the spur, and then you have less tonnage that you have to take up over the mountain.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Our next question is me. Wasatch Wind asks a simple thing. Will money be in real life amounts? A number of games like Roller Coaster Tycoon reduce the cost of things like getting a carousel in that game for $300, rather than a more realistic price. I imagine it's to make it easier for players to add up smaller, rounder numbers. What's the team's philosophy for this game? Like almost everything else, we start from reality. So when I'm looking up what a modification should cost, my first go-to is to see if I can find the prices in industry catalogs. I actually have a whole list of what every single Westinghouse brake schedule cost, what it weighed, all of that good stuff. Similarly, where we can, we know what locomotives and cars weighed, and we have a huge document that is just what every commodity we want in the game tends to weigh in terms of density, tends to cost, etc., in the units that make the most sense. We'll then tune that so that our economy functions, but we're starting from reality.
Man, $300 for a carousel? I'd take that deal. It's a
$300
damn good deal.
for a full set of air brakes as well, and that's historical. All right, over to you for the next question, Tom.
Yep, next question is from Jim Yeatast, or Yeatast. I apologize for the pronunciation on that. My main question is about the economy / industry / progression. How will we get access to new industries? Do we unlock them right away, or is it progression-based? Furthermore, how will we unlock locomotives and rolling stock? And are we able to purchase anything if we have the funds, or do we have to have progression and build the railroad first? So industries, as a general rule, will be directly accessible to the railroad at all times. It would be very unrealistic and honestly a little bit silly for a railroad to be denied access to an industry and sent out on a side quest to several other industries first. Like if there is a business that needs goods hauled to market, they will gladly accept the railroad fares if it works for their business, and then you have stuff you can take even if you're just taking the finished product. We want it to be set up like Railroad Tycoon 3 in a way, and we talk about this in the RT3 retrospective video a lot, where we want to have every industry be able to give the players some amount of work that they can do, regardless if the full chain is connected. If you connect to just a sawmill or just a log landing, there will be work that you can do there where you really start compounding your profits is connecting the full industry chain and making the full supply runs, delivering things like steam donkeys to the landings, things like machinery to the sawmill, these additional requirements and buff products which will compound the amount you get out of it once you connect it together. But we don't want to shut people out from the order in which they want to connect things or the route they want to place. As for locomotives and rolling stock, that will be addressed in another question later in this video. Yeah. So moving on, the next question from Allison Chains 3718. In a previous devlog, you guys mentioned that some locomotives will be gated by the era you are currently playing in. They got me wondering, how will eras progress in game? Is it just based on the scenario you picked out, or will it change as you play the game? And if the era changes over time, will that just affect locomotive selection, or will the wider world as a whole change? Also, side question to this, will our railroad have a noticeable impact on the world at large, e.g. businesses rising and falling or towns growing based on how well you serve them? So this is sort of a continuation from the last question. And as a preface, if you haven't seen the Railroad Tycoon 3 retrospective video on this channel, I highly recommend you do that first. It will give a lot of context in what we discuss, sort of what is the campaign side of this game that we want planned. Because we do want people to have an open sandbox, just running trains, doing industry work casually. But for people who want structured gameplay, we want to have a proper campaign and scenario mode there so that they have explicit objectives to put their railroad to the test. The way eras will work is the era decides what kind of work you can do, what world events affect the economy and the tasks at hand, and the locomotives and rolling stock that are available for you to complete those challenges. So as you complete challenges within an era and prove that your railroad is able to stand up to the challenges of, say, that decade or that 20-year period, as just a hypothetical example, once you've completed enough of those, you can then advance to the next era, which means that new economy events can happen, new world events can happen, and more importantly, you will get a new updated catalog of locomotives and rolling stock. So the catalogs are curated specifically not just to show what each builder had in vogue over time, but locomotives that would fit well to sort of rising traffic demands and, you know, diversification or changes in the economy, changes in traffic demands. And so that will be a neat way to see how, you know, the equipment and the challenges placed on your railroad start to open up and new strategies and routes become available to you that way. And we really think it's going to be a super immersive and fun way to go through that history. And yes, the change in eras and the impact of the railroad, we do want to have an effect on the world, because that is one of the most immediate feedbacks where you can feel like what I am doing matters. What I am doing is interconnected with larger things around me. We don't want it to just be, you know, you are playing with a train set. We want it to be you are walking through a living history lesson almost.
Yeah, and conversely, we don't want it to affect too much, right? You're not going to make Palisade, Nevada a metropolis, but you might keep it alive for a while longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be the major difference between RT3 and this is, and I think we might have talked about that in the video, is like in Railroad Tycoon, every single town can become a 5-star town. Whereas with this, certain towns are just there to support local industry or the industry of the railroad. But continuing that still gives a good little place to run, say, like a combine at the end of a mixed train. And it really keeps in it keeps to the vibe that we kind of want to give of like narrow gauge doesn't always have to be a giant sprawling railroad. You can just have something like the Martha's Vineyard system where they just had one porter, a baggage car, and 2 coaches, and they just ran that little consist. And if we can make just running something as small as that consist fun, then I think we've done something really good here.
Yeah. All right, Eric, for the next question.
From Emile Person. I've got a question about the catalogs with locomotives and rolling stock. Will there be a separate catalog for each builder? For example, one for Baldwin and one for Porter? If it were to be separated by builder, it would be a fun game mechanic if you could get a slight loyalty discount for buying a lot of locomotives from one specific builder. Our catalogs are going to be divided by era, not by the builder. But we will provide search filters by builder within each catalog. If players have a preference for one builder over the other, just to make it more intuitive. Although certain railroads historically, like the Boston Revere Beach and Lynn, used exclusively Mason bogies and held them in high praise, or maybe there was an entirely all Baldwin railroad somewhere. A loyalty program is not in plan, as that's not really a prototypical thing. Different builders often offer differing levels of reliability, repair costs, and other perks or drawbacks that will give players a lot of room to navigate the variety with strategic consideration.
Yeah. So we want this thing to be immersive, right? And so the catalog is representative of real catalogs, but we don't want to give you like an entire Baldwin catalog and then make you set it down and pick up a Porter catalog. At best, it will look different. You will know that you are now in a Porter, like looking at a Porter page, but you're not going to have, you know, these catalogs have a canned history of the builder at the start of it. You don't want to read that. Or you do, but not every time you have to choose what engine you're, you know, looking at and comparing from one to the other. So having a streamlined setup is a much better gameplay choice. It also helps us represent engines or builders that were not huge in the narrow gauge scene. If we had a Cook catalog, there would be 3 engines in it if we represented every narrow gauge Cook locomotive. You don't need a separate catalog for that. It'll be cool to have the page look like it's from a Cook catalog, but that's largely our thinking here. It's better to have it streamlined. Slandered Stone asks, I know there's been mention of locomotives being hot and ready to go a lot of the time, like when you buy something new. But will locomotives have the ability to go fully cold if you leave them sitting for a while? I feel that having a cold, dilapidated locomotive sitting on a deadline or outside a roundhouse could be cool for environmental storytelling, crafted by just playing the game and upgrading equipment. We're mostly going to answer the first part of that question. As we answered to Fabian's question, respecting the time the player chooses to spend with our game is hugely important to us. And our hot and ready approach to locomotive readiness is another concession that we make to avoid dead time during the gameplay. As much as I personally really love hostling, it is a lot of just sitting there. And in a game context, even if you have, the rest of your crew out there on call and can talk as you do this stuff, we don't have the same level of in-depth starting procedures and oiling around that you do on the real engine. So there is not that same level of talking over the job. And even if there was, it wouldn't be as engaging in a computer format. So having engines be kept warm is a good solution to that. Now, there might be ways to emulate a dilapidated locomotive, partly as a function of weathering, but we are not going to enforce that you have to spend however long heating up a locomotive just because you haven't hired a night watchman, because no one is going to want to be the night watchman in a game session. Back to Eric for the next question.
Wild Bison asks, how are loads generated? It's mentioned in the last devlog that the camp ordered a new steam donkey. Will industries periodically order new supplies? Will it be a constant delivery, a mix, or something else? Will we have the option not to have to instantly load and unload cars if we wish? And then how much say will players have in what industries we service? So, each industry has certain outputs that they produce, input items that they require to operate, and additionally, some have secondary facilities that have an effect on production output, speed, quality, or other buffs to that industry chain. Some inputs scale with output, and others, like machinery, may be needed less frequently. Players can choose exactly how large or small of a railroad they would like to operate, as well as how deeply involved in industry management they would like to be, without needing to worry about connecting or upgrading every single location.
To Tom for the next question.
Okay, the next question is from the Random Pineapple. In the Meet the Team devlog, y'all mentioned that you started working or at least thinking about character creation and the historical authenticity of clothing. Will I be able to make myself look stupid in this game? Not saying that I would, but if I had the opportunity, I'd like to have the opportunity. Also, can we have a map that's just a flat expanse where we can just try dumb stuff, almost like a creative mode? So with regards to the first question, we have in plan a cast of several distinct and visually diverse character models planned for the game. Think in terms of instead of a full character creator, you have something like the classes in Team Fortress 2. You have heavy, engineer, soldier, pyro. Similar to that in that it is distinct faces, distinct people with various clothing options for each, but there will not be like a full character creator like something in Fallout or a FromSoft game. That's just out of scope for us. But yeah, we want to keep the characters distinct, interesting, charming, representative of a lot of our potential player base. With regard to, can we have a map that is a flat expanse where we can just try dumb stuff as like a sandbox or creative mode? We have clarified this before. We have 4 maps in plan for the main scope of the game. We are looking at Ponderosa, which is our Sierra Nevada, Eastern California logging map. We have Keystone, which was recently announced as our East Coast Appalachian map set in Pennsylvania coal country. And then there are 2 yet to be named maps. One in the high deserts of Nevada and California, similar to SP Owens Valley stuff or the Eureka and Palisade, the Nevada Central. And then the fourth map we have planned is set in the Continental Divide region of Colorado. So Colorado, Nevada, California, and Pennsylvania are what we are sticking to as far as map scope, and we feel that will give us the most bang for the buck of diverse variety of places and biomes and equipment to fit there without spiraling too much out of control. All right, and then moving on to the next question from Matthew Hume. I am very excited for max realistic train driving and firing, track building, and railroad management. I'm also cautiously aware that many go anywhere, do anything style games struggle a lot with balance. How does Century of Steam make all of its facets work together? And what does that look like for someone who will mostly play single player, even though I'm excited for multiplayer too? So yes, absolutely. The way we think about everything with this game, even though we want it as a game with multiplayer functionality, you have to think about everything from gameplay, pacing, and overall scale of things to work with single player. Even in a multiplayer game, a lot of the player base is going to be single player, and it has to scale to that. So one of our goals for Century of Steam is to make it as fun and enjoyable as it can be just with a single train, either in single player with crew assist for firing or other roles on the train, or in a multiplayer session where each player has their own unique tasks to perform as, say, engineer or fireman or conductor, brakeman, dispatch, so on and so forth. By scaling the number of trains to be constant, but the number of things that you can do on the train to change, that then lets a single player and a multiplayer environment be roughly similar in terms of overall tonnage, overall stuff you're doing. It's just whether or not you want to do it yourself and have some help to do it, or if you want to bring your friends on and you all try to do it together and you have that co-op experience. And really the sense of co-op, of having multiple person crews all working directly off of each other to make the thing work, is really going to be something fun for us to show, because it's not really something that's been tenable in the way games have been set up for multiplayer. They've often been competitive in the case of Railroad Tycoon, or often if it is quasi co-op, it's one person running a single train and you have multiple trains trying to fit in the same network. So giving people the opportunity to work together towards the same goal of one train will be a very fresh look at it. And overall, we believe a smaller, more tight-knit, and better paced and dense playing experience where you get to be fully involved in the fun and challenge of railroading in all sorts of different aspects. We think that will be the best experience as far as what we want to show. And the romance and charm of small, personable, narrow gauge operations, I think, plays to those strengths very handily.
Yeah. All right. Dan, not this Dan, that Dan Silva asks, now that you've got a lot more on the train dynamics and modeling done, are you getting a better idea of computer system requirements for Century of Steam? Any chance of a Mac version? Further discussion about support for third-party controllers or multiple screens to wrap the view around the player more? We don't have concrete recommended specs just yet, and we probably won't until pretty close to release. This is the nature of development, plan to ship on Windows. We haven't looked into what will be required for multi-monitor support, but ultra-wide single displays are supported. Our project manager has one. It gets plenty of testing.
As far as shipping on other platforms, the thing is there is a lot of licensing and money that can actually go into things like shipping on PlayStation, shipping on Xbox.
Shipping on consoles is a non-starter. I don't know that the same problems exist with Mac.
With Mac, the thing is, it's a pain in the butt. You have to actually compile on Mac hardware. It winds up being like a pretty big time investment for like a really small sliver of the player base. While I hate having to tell a Mac player, like, no, it really just does not seem like it would be productive use of time and all of the resources that Patreon has given us to kind of focus on shipping on Mac.
Yeah, and those resources are genuinely helping us to continue this project and to make strides and expediencies and improvements that we wouldn't have been able to do without your guys' help and your contributions. But that said, it is still very small compared to larger studios, and we need to be very careful in how we budget that.
Yeah, like spending $2,000 or $3,000 on a Mac PC simply so we could compile the project for Mac, like that is not good stewardship of the funds y'all so kindly contribute. It just isn't. So
yeah,
but all right, I think that about wraps up what we had set out for the Q&A.
That's all our questions here. So we've got one more brief part to the video, which will come up shortly.
Yes. Y'all are going to get to meet someone new. It's going to be super, super fun, so we'll see you in a little bit. All right, everyone. As I said at the beginning of the video, I have a special someone to introduce you to. We have expanded our team. We now have a new team member here at Studio 346, and I would like all of you to meet Drew. How's it going, Drew?
What's up, guys? Happy to be here. Been working on a little project for Studio 346. Been working on a DNRGW long caboose, and I am happy to finally show off little bits of it now.
Yeah, it's not quite done yet, but you were kind enough to give me little preview shots of it that we can show off today, and it's looking really, really good.
Yes, I'm very happy with the progress I've made on this caboose. It is coming along together very nicely.
Yeah, and now obviously you've been personal friends with a bunch of us here at Studio 346 for a while, but for those who don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into this space?
Well, I started modeling not a few years ago, a while ago, and I started modeling steam locomotives and all that. Of course, went through all that. Somehow never did the donut tutorial, but here I am. I started modeling an RS-1325 for Railroader, and I showed it off to Mark, and Mark saw how impressive my skills were and thought this guy would be a great addition to the team. So here I am.
Yeah, I think we all kind of thought that. We all saw the work that you were doing in Railroader modding, and we were kind of like, maybe this guy needs to be actually on the team. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about what you enjoy as far as real railroads go?
Well, my real railroad taste, I volunteer at the Monticello Railway Museum in Illinois. So I typically like vintage diesels, like F units. Again, I mentioned earlier an EMD RS-1325, which I'm very fond of. We also have a few steam engines there. Southern Railway number 401 is one of them. So, but I'm mostly a steam guy at heart. I love steam. Steam has been like my upbringing in terms of trains. But I have started to learn that vintage diesels are cool too.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same place. I'm very much a steam guy, but I've also been discovering that stuff like early F units, Jeep 7s, Jeep 9s, those are really cool. But I think at heart, I'm firmly always going to be in that transition era kind of stage.
Same here.
Awesome. Well, before we get going, is there anything else you want to share with us?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think I have anything I can share yet, but I just know I will be continuing to do a lot of modeling for Studio 346.
Yeah, and we are so looking forward to it. We've got you on a special project that we can't talk about, but I think it's something everyone else is going to love once you're done with the long caboose.
Yes.
So, thank you so much for being here with us, and we're really happy to have you on the team.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I really hope you've enjoyed the first devlog I've ever put together. I'm sure it's going to wind up being a little rough around the edges, so please bear with me. Really hope you enjoyed seeing some of the Shay customizations, the Q&A, and meeting Drew. We're really, really excited to have him, so hope y'all have a wonderful day, wonderful Labor Day weekend, and we will see you all in the September devlog. Later, y'all.